Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the special meeting for the purpose of a capital improvement plan workshop for Tuesday, November 14th. At this time, I'd ask that you please join me for a pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next order of business is roll call. The chair will call the roll. Commissioner Simmons.
Aye.
Commissioner Anderson.
Here.
Commissioner Olson.
Here.
Commissioner George. Let the record show that there are four of the five commissioners. Commissioner George is absent today. Next order of business is to approve the order of the agenda. It has been distributed, commissioners, and it is in front of you.
So moved.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Commissioner Anderson seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the order of the agenda. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. We're moving on to the regular agenda. The first item on the regular agenda is a meeting for the purpose of overview and discussion. It's going to be led by Dan Hansen, the City Engineer of the City of West Fargo, and talk about projects. Good morning, Mr. Hansen, and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Commissioner President Dardis and Commissioners. I want to thank you for your time this morning out of your day for us to get together and to have a discussion of some projects with regards to the capital improvement plan for the City of West Fargo. Got a PowerPoint presentation that I'll be navigating through here to keep me on track. So today we're going to go through the purpose of the workshop, and then there's three separate projects that I'd like to have a discussion on today. Bring up what the scope of those projects are, explain them a little bit, some estimated costs, and then with each one of those projects review some existing funding policies that we have in place right now for special assessments, and have a discussion as far as potential changes that we would want to make for that. Again, today it's just a discussion. We're not looking for any decisions to be made formally. The purpose for me today is just to get your feedback for when I bring these projects forward as to how you'd like to see those go. So again, this is not a comprehensive CIP workshop. We anticipate that we'll have a CIP planned and presented by the latest in June of 2024, and that would be a revamp of the 5-year CIP plan with some additional projects that we know are in the future listed in there. So we're going to have some workshops and discussions with that prior to finalizing the 2024 CIP. This workshop is to discuss the CIP projects that are anticipated to be completed in 24. Ideally, I would have loved to have just brought it comprehensively forward, but the reason for me requesting to have this audience today of your attention is that there are some projects that we are slated to do in 2024, and we've had some preliminary work done on them, and I just wanted to get some feedback from the Commission as far as when we bring these projects forward, what we would anticipate we would want to bring forward as far as percentages of special assessments and things like that. So today is for me, selfishly, to get some feedback for you. And when I do work together with my staff and other staff over the winter to put together the 2024 CIP, I'll be taking some of this information into that effort. So that way, when we come back with that, we can show kind of what a ripple effect would be over the next 5 to 10 years. The three projects that we have to talk about today is Westwood Neighborhood Reconstruction. That's an existing residential reconstruction in the core area. the sanitary sewer relining project in the core area, and as well as citywide asphalt mill and overlays are the three projects. Beginning with the Westwood construction, again, this is a core area project. The original infrastructure for this development was installed in 1959, 64 years ago. There isn't a lot of records that there was any rehabilitation on these roadways or any of the infrastructure. And what we find is that the roadways are failing in the neighborhood. The lighting is on existing wooden poles, and the utilities are beyond their design life. The water main, for example, is asbestos concrete pipe, which is it's a product that was used at the time, and the sanitary sewer is old clay tile, and there's a lack of storm sewer in the area, which has been a contributor to why the streets have eroded and deteriorated in that development. So this project was included as one of the top priorities in the core area plan that was done previously. And I'll just kind of take you through some of the...
Dan?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, can I ask a question right away?
Yeah.
When you say Westwood reconstruction, you're referring way to the west in that development?
Yeah, it's basically just on the west side of the river, south of 7th Street, Oak Street, that...
Oh, so that's what you're considering Westwood,
Correct,
not the actual Westwood way to the west?
Correct. If you just going by the plat names, the west...
Okay, so that would be that whole area from Main all the way to 13th then?
No, I can forward on to... if you can take a look at your screen here, you can see this. The neighborhood is shown on the screen right there. Basically, on the north side of this neighborhood is 7th Avenue, right where 7th crosses the river on the south side.
And to the south then of that, so that would be Oak Street. And what about to the north of all that? That's all pretty old too.
It is. However, this is the project. This is the neighborhood that was identified as one of the top priorities from that core area plan. There are numerous neighborhoods within the core area that are in need of reconstruct, and I'll just kind of jump outside this presentation to state we did have that core area study that identified a great number of projects that were needed. That there have been some improvements done as a result of that core area study. Right now, we've got more engineering looking at those projects again. If you recall, they're looking at that core area project study. They're not redoing it, but they're basically bringing it forward and making it current with costs. And one of the tasks that they were set out in the study that they're doing for us right now is to come back with a list of 8 projects that we would program in over the next number of years. There will be other core area neighborhoods that are going to be identified as in need of that. However, this is the neighborhood that was identified in the original core area study as the highest priority of those. So does that answer your question, Commissioner Simmons?
Okay.
Okay. So taking it through the existing infrastructure out there, the roadways are deteriorating, in need of repair. They're beyond the point of doing a mill and overlay. A lot of the alligator cracking is present, settlement is occurring, and I believe a lot of that is due to the lack of storm sewer in that neighborhood, and I can show you an example of that in a moment. Sanitary sewer is 8-inch vitrified clay pipe, VCP. A lot of people call it just clay tile pipe. Again, it's beyond its useful life. This is actually a picture from Oak Street of the inside of that pipe. Anytime these pipes could potentially collapse, which would cause sewer backups and things of that nature. There's also different types of rehab that you can do where you can line the pipes, but given the fact that the water main and the sanitary is in need of reconstruction, it makes sense once we're doing an open trench construction to do a reconstruction of all the utilities within the neighborhood. It's not like there's streets worth saving above these utilities, so that's where it lends itself to be a complete reconstruct. So the sanitary sewer, again, VCP, that's beyond its useful life, showing signs of beginning to fail. The water main is 8-inch asbestos cement pipe. ACP, typical life cycle for that is 50 to 60 years, which we've hit. Any kind of water main breaks, they can cause disruptions in water service and also can impact the structural integrity of the roadway by washing out the material that's underneath the roadway, creating sinkholes and things of that nature. So that's in need of reconstruction. And then again, a big factor in this neighborhood is, if you can see, is that I show on the left is a picture of the entire neighborhood. And this shows all the storm sewer in the neighborhood, which is basically non-existent other than the very southern east-west street where we've got a few inlets. So any drop of water that falls within this neighborhood, including that midway street that bisects the neighborhood, if a drop of water falls on the middle of that street, it has to navigate, that water has to navigate all the way down the street, head south, and then eventually find those inlets. And so just the lack of storm sewer and drainage in this neighborhood, especially with the settlement that has occurred in the roadways, is what has contributed to a lot of the deterioration of the roadways in the neighborhood. So overall, the streets and utilities are at the point where they need to be replaced. The proposed reconstruction would be to replace again all the water and sewer in the neighborhood, and then also to install storm sewer throughout the neighborhood. There's the existing park to the south. North is to the right on this picture. We would basically create a new connection to the river by heading the storm sewer to the south. The existing storm sewer that is out there today is basically an undersized pipe that goes between two houses out to the river. And so it's just not feasible for us to reconstruct that pipe in that close proximity to those homes. So what we're looking at doing is collecting all the storm water, taking it to the south through the park and making a new connection to the river on the just south of the development. But what this is the storm sewer addition is gonna be able to do is it's gonna be able to add inlets throughout the neighborhood, so that way we can capture some of the water, get it off the streets and get it into the storm sewer piping, and to protect the streets and the curb and gutter. We did do a neighborhood survey last year at about this time. We had distributed it to all the residents in the neighborhood. We had 21 residents respond. 70% of the respondents did say that they felt that infrastructure improvements were necessary. The one thing that was not included, it was basically a needs survey. It was not a cost survey. We didn't provide any costs, any special assessments, so please take into consideration that the feedback that we got from the neighborhood did not talk about how much do we need to pay for this. It was basically, are you seeing water standing in your driveways? Are you seeing, the deterioration of the roadways? Have you had any sewer issues? 43% of them said that drainage or standing water has directly impacted them. 71% stated conditions of the streets, the ability for water to drain from the streets are in bad to fair condition. And I can provide that survey and those results if you like. They were pretty telling that the people in the neighborhood know something needs to be done with this. The hard part of that is the financing of it.
Can I ask, Dan, how many homes are in that neighborhood?
I believe there is 87.
87, so, okay.
That are, from memory, don't quote me, but it's really close to that if it's not that. So the recommendations is to completely reconstruct the utilities and all of the streets, replace the sanitary sewer main and the water main with new PVC, install the new storm sewer throughout the neighborhood, and provide proper street lighting as well. Basically, take the neighborhood and make the right-of-way new again. The CIP for the 2022 CIP that was approved in March 21st of 2022 had on their guideline for special assessing projects. And in that guideline, they stated it was under the fact that local reconstruction would have a city cost of 40% and we would assess 60% of the costs of the local road improvements and the complete reconstruct. I just put a bullet point down on the bottom based off of current discussions I've had with the city of Fargo. If you've heard in the news, some of the CIP workshops that they've been doing is they're looking to, they pay approximately 80% of local reconstruction projects. Right now, we're at 40%. So in 2022, we had More Engineering provide a feasibility study, which the first thing that we do when we have a project of this nature is we have a feasibility study, so that way we can get an idea of here's what the cost of the project is going to be and what we would anticipate being assessed for it. The estimated cost of the project, according to that feasibility report, was $6.3 million to be reconstructed as I showed on that slide. In 2019, the core area master plan had an estimated $3.5 million and recommended that reconstruction of this neighborhood occur in 2022. You can see the costs have jumped dramatically from that core area study to the feasibility study. However, if we're talking a difference between those two reports and those two studies, is that the core area study took a macrospective look at everything, and they made some assumptions. With the feasibility study, that was specifically looking at the neighborhood and knowing here's how many lineal feet of pipe we're going to need to replace of this and that. Where the core area study made some assumptions, and I can imagine that, you know, one of the assumptions that was made in the core area study was that there was no storm sewer in the neighborhood, so they probably only replaced a few inlets on the south side. So the feasibility study is a more accurate look. And also, we've had a number of things happen since 2019 with COVID and inflation, and the cost of prices of construction has greatly increased. So the new estimated cost for the reconstruction is $6.3 million for this neighborhood. So applying that current guideline policy is that the city would pay 40% and assess 60% of those project costs. If you break that down from the $6.3 million, the city's cost share of that would be about $2.5 million, with the assessed portion being $3.78 million. And the reason I haven't brought this forward to the commission is because an assessment range in that feasibility study was shown to be $40,820 to $80,513 on each one of these core area residential neighborhoods. That number is dead on impact if we were to bring this forward. It's just that's not feasible for our residents to pay that much of a cost share. I believe at a commission meeting months in the past, I brought up that this study was done, but what we had is a $40,000 to $80,000 assessment, so I hadn't brought it forward, which caught the ear of some people, and in fact, Commissioner Simmons even made a comment to that on the radio program, that the reason that when they said, did I hear you right, $40,000 to $80,000 in assessments? And correctly, Commissioner Simmons said, yeah, that's why it hasn't come before us right now, is we're figuring this out. So again, today is just a discussion with this project. When I do bring this project forward, what would be the commission's what would the commission like to see for me to have in my engineer's report? And again, maybe today's discussion, we're not approving anything, I'm just getting your feedback on it. But maybe we need to take a look at this even further, you know, since we're not making final decisions today. But I did run some scenarios. If we moved that 60% assessment down to 50% assessment, that average of $50,000 drops down to $43,750. Again, that's too high of an amount for special assessments to pay, in my opinion, for the core area or any resident. Another example is if the city paid 75% and assessed 25%, that gets the average down to about $21,875. For a complete reconstruction, that's actually a fairly reasonable number. If you take a look at the if you take a barren field and you have a contractor go in and just be able to throw their dirt and just not be impinged by neighborhoods of people that need to get in and out. This is a lot harder to construct for a contractor than open field construction down in the wilds, for example. But if you take a look at what the specials are down in the wilds for the original improvements, you know, you're talking, it's not unheard of to see a $40,000 assessment. This is more complex, and we have to remove what exists before we can even construct it. So we do traditionally have 25-year assessment is what we've done. I put a yearly estimated payment with an assumed 6% interest. That would be subject to whatever the going rate is at the time of the improvement. And again, I put another one to reflect more of what Fargo does, where they would pay 80% and assess 20%. That gets the average assessment down to approximately the average $17,500. So obviously you would have some bigger lots that would pay more and some smaller lots that would pay less than that. But that gets, those assessment percentages really get us down into more of what I would think would be a reasonable amount for a homeowner to pay for an assessment. So, so again, the purpose today is to lay these costs out in front of you just to get some feedback. I did also put on here is if I got a hold of Moorhead and I also got a hold of Fargo. Fargo, again, they would assess approximately 20% as I showed. Moorhead, for a complete reconstruct, they would assess $125 per front foot is what they would assess for a reconstruct. An existing lot would be assessed $8,750 because one of the other things that Moorhead does not do is they don't assess any costs for the underground utilities. They only assess costs for the roadway portions of their projects. So just a different method of how they do it, but I wanted to provide that perspective to you when we're talking about what we would like to do here. And at this point, I guess I would just open it up for discussion as far as my job is to bring the need forward. The hard part is how do we pay for it and the political aspects of how are people going to be able to afford something like this.
Commissioner Simmons.
Thank you. Dan, I think one of the biggest issues we're gonna have is when you talk about out south at 40,000, you know, those homes are, you know, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000. You're gonna be hard pressed to find a home for $350,000, $300,000 in this area. So
Yep.
it's very hard to, I mean, even the very slightest one at $1,300, that's another $100, a little over $100 on a home. That a lot of those people are retired people, income too, that live in that area as well as around here.
Yep,
So
absolutely.
it's going to be a difficult process for us to figure out how to do this. And then, of course, when you do one area, that sets a precedent for every other area that we do. And that becomes the biggest issue with our funding mechanism.
And that's part of the information I don't have today, that we will have more information when we come back with the comprehensive CIP is what does, I was to get feedback today that says, well, 75% seems reasonable. I'd like you to show me that when you come back. And we do that. Well, then obviously we would apply that towards here's how we're going to do these other core area reconstructs in the future. How does this ripple effect through the future to give us the ability to still do projects? Commissioner President Dardis mentioned in a recent commission meeting, maybe we need to pay more for projects and do less projects to make it affordable for people. Well, what's the hinge point as far as making it affordable for people and still be able to do enough projects that we're able to reconstruct the core area of town?
Commissioner Olson.
Last night on, I can't remember which news channel it was, but they did say that Fargo was doing a study and that they're rethinking how much the city is going to pay, and they're probably going to have to change their formula where the residents are going to have to pay more. Not that that's what we need to do, but it is something that Fargo's going to be looking at changing their formula and not paying the full 80% anymore, possibly.
There, right now, I've had a lot of, some discussions, email discussions with their city engineer as well, and currently right now, I believe they're, with they cap it, they have dollar amounts for front foot, it's this dollar amount, and they've asked for, to my understanding, let's say a 20% increase in that. Now, that doesn't mean a 20% increase in specials, 20% on their formula. So where I believe they're paying 86% right now, because when you're capped at a dollar amount and inflation happens, the dollar amount stays the same. So right now they were, I believe, at 86%. The 20% increase that they're asking for gets it back to more of an 80-20 split. So their goal is to get back to that 80-20, because right now they're paying upwards of 84 or 86%. So yeah, they are looking at increasing their cap to it, but still staying towards that 80-20 from my understanding.
Mr. Scott, where are we at in the biennium of prairie dog funds? How much dollars have we received? You have any, in a previous commission, that was one of the discussions that we had, is that all the prairie dog dollars would be used for infrastructure, not green space infrastructure, but existing. So, Mr. Scott?
Thank you, Commission President Dardis and Commissioners. Yes, we received roughly $10.5 million in this last biennium. And like you said, the Commission has previously indicated that they want those dollars to go towards the local infrastructure replacement projects. We do have a book of work that was already constructed and completed. And so what we need to start to work with the Commission on is, do we fund those projects with that prairie dog money, or are we going to set aside this prairie dog money to focus in on these local reconstruction projects? Like Mr. Hansen said, we do have additional workshops that we're going to be planning with commissioners on the full CIP, but a portion of that is also going to be to unwind the clock a little bit, look at some of the projects that we have completed over the last few years, in that we haven't closed those off the books yet. We still have to, decide, are we using prairie dog funds for some of those, or are we going to set that money aside for these future projects?
So with these new projects in 2024, what do you anticipate the inflation rate to be at? Are we still at 7.19?
The advertised 7.19 hasn't been reflected in the construction industry from what I've seen. We have typically anticipated about a 10% inflation rate with these projects in construction.
So that being said, Mr. Hansen, the initial price for this was $3 million some odd dollars, and now it's $6,300,000. That's certainly greater than 10% inflation.
Correct. Yeah. I would say from 2019 to 2023, we experienced far greater than 10% inflation during that time, given COVID, given the industry is catching up as far as being able to provide the materials, and there were projects that were bid out a few years ago that were 50% over the engineer's estimate, because the amount of that contractors were having to bid on it just to get the materials. So I would anticipate moving forward, I typically factor in a 10% for that, but, and again, going back to that original 3.5 million or so that was in the core area study, that was a snapshot from 30,000 feet about here's what it would typically cost to reconstruct a neighborhood, as well as, again, they didn't get into the weeds on any particular project. It was because they were taking a look at a great number of projects. For example, moving forward with More Engineering's report that's coming back, they're taking a look at that in the same way, but they're going to be picking the next 8 projects that they're going to triage for us and they're gonna actually be looking at those 8 projects with a finer microscope so that way it won't be to the level of a feasibility study, but it should be very close to that, where they're actually going in, looking at record drawings, coming up with quantities and assigning unit prices that they feel are adequate for the anticipated year of construction.
Well, I must say that to you and your engineering team, this is a very important dialogue and conversation that we need to have. The fact that, you know, if even looking at the assessed value of 50% is not acceptable. I mean, we can't expect to place that on our taxpayers. It's too much. And as you know, we understand the needs of these improvements, but the affordability issue, and like I said, maybe we have to take a look at our long-range CIP plan and invest more money, do less projects in order to make it affordable for the taxpayers. Commissioner Olson has a point.
One thing where the big cost increase, I think, was what you identified, where the 3.5 million project only kept the existing stormwater drains the way it was, but now you've added in, which will, for sure, increase the cost, but it also will save the roads and the infrastructure a lot longer if we just, you know, if we just left it the way it was, we're going to be right back here again in a short time. So there's another increase in cost too. If you went back and just did the same project from the 3.5, it probably wouldn't be up to 6.3, but you added in a whole pile of stormwater.
Yep, and just modern day, the nuances of how we construct roadways we'll use drain tile, we'll connect that to the sewer, we'll get rid of ambient moisture into the subbase. That's gonna help the freeze thaws from not affecting our roadways as much. There's a fabric that we put down or a geogrid that we put down also. I mean, there are some things that we do to add life expectancy to the roadway at low cost in consideration with the cost of the project, but removing a little bit of moisture from the subbase can potentially give your road another 5 to 10 years. And I can show examples.
Another thing to consider would be, do we need to have all the streetlights? I've been to different areas of the country where there's hardly a streetlight to be found. I mean, is that a cost savings? Should we, you know, roll back on how many streetlights we have per block? Would that save any costs? Probably not a lot.
We only have one. And we're kind of in this, you know, sense to this area,
But,
so,
I mean,
yeah.
that's just a point to think about, you know, because I've been in the Dallas area, for example. It's like, holy crap, there's hardly a streetlight to be found, but maybe that's why they're saving a few nickels and dimes, you know.
Thank you. So Commissioner Olson gave me a great segue into this. And I think Mr. Scott recalls this, I'm not sure, but quite a few years ago, we were going to redo this area. We're going to repave it. And that's all we were going to do. And everybody kind of thought they wanted it until we come up with a number. And I'll guarantee you today, out of 87, those 21, once you give them a number, you may get 7 or 8 that will say, okay, we still want to go. And that's not near enough to do the project, a street project. So here's the question I have for this commission. Do we have the political wherewithal to override that? Because you can on a sewer project, not on a street, but on a sewer, that can be mandated to be done. So that's a question we have to ask this commission. Are we prepared to go down that road? Because if we are not, then a lot of this is not worth discussing. I mean, it is, but it's not. I'm just saying, if we don't have the political wherewithal to say, okay, even though 70% or 60% of the people don't want it, we're going to do it anyway. If we don't have that, then it's a moot point. I see Mr. Scott nodding his head, so I know that he somewhat agrees with that.
Commissioner Anderson.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, and I've thought about it too because it's been brought up in a couple of meetings that I've had with engineering on this one. And to go back a little bit, I struggle with looking at these numbers and just kind of thinking about just one project. I'd like to see, even when we get the engineer's report, see what an impact would be if we do have a number in mind, what that impact would be downstream with other projects. As I think that would probably drive what our thoughts are with some things. Ideally, I'd like to see what we assess as close to zero as possible. Unfortunately, I don't know how possible that is, right? But getting it down to a level where we're assessing 20% like our neighbors are, I think that's a bit more palatable. And when we're talking about state law and where things are required more or less, like sanitary sewer and stuff, because there's health issues and those have to be done and they are assessed, maybe we look at ways to kind of parse out that cost. And it's kind of a right pocket, left pocket type thing of, okay, we're not going to assess out the pavement portion of the project, but we have to assess out the health related items, which would be the sanitary sewer. So question I had on this when we're looking at the interest in over 25 years, is that 25 years, is that typical? Can we go longer to kind of lower, right, that price? I know there'd be more interest involved and there'd be some other things, but seeing that these pipes and everything underground have life expectancy of far greater than 25 years, I feel like that would be something that, might be possible to look at and perhaps lower what a yearly payment would be.
Yeah, great. If Mr. Shockley was here, he'd be more educated to answer that question. Typically, what I've seen is for an improvement bond for a capital improvement project, typically 25 years is as far out as I've seen. With respect to that, you're right. When you put PVC in the ground, the average life expectancy of a PVC pipe is 100 years. That should outlast the roadway twofold. When you install the brand new road, as you can see in the Southside Mill and Overlay projects, after about 10 to 15 years, you come back with an overlay, which adds another assessment to that. And then you do seal coats, maintenance, typically in another 15 years, possibly you would do another overlay to extend the life of the roadway, and you hope to get 45 years out of a roadway by the time that you've done 2 mill and overlays and seal coats. And then usually in that 45 to 50 year range is typically where you're seeing us, back to the point where it's okay, it's time to reconstruct the roadway. So the life expectancy of all the improvements that we're looking at, especially the concrete and the pipe in the ground, should be far greater than that 25 years. The roadway should be roughly 45 years, but again, once you're throwing assessments out there that much, again, like you said, it's interest rates and payments is what it comes down to. I have not seen a greater than 25-year assessment for an improvement project.
Mr. Scott?
Yeah, my understanding with refunding improvement bonds have a max term of 25 years. We could go less, but we can't go beyond that. There may be other bonding or funding mechanisms that utilize a longer term, but in terms of a refunding improvement bond that we typically use, that's a maximum term of 25 years.
Thank you. Commissioner Simmons?
The other thing is, right now that's at 6%. Hopefully in a few years that will go down. And we always rebond them anyway, refinance them. So hopefully that'll go down to 3%, and which would really, cut it down as well. So, we've done that many times over the years, so
Yes, absolutely. And
it's hard to tell.
yeah, we've typically have seen anywhere from 3 to 5% interest, but like everything else, things have inflated, and so we're being a little conservative by using a 6%. But yes, as the opportunity presents itself, we can do a holistic refinancing, if you will, of our open current debt. And historically, we have taken the term from 25 years. We have been able to shave years off of that term and close out these bonds earlier, which means for the taxpayer, their assessment payments do stop earlier.
Commissioner Anderson?
So on that, just to clarify, it does shorten the term if we were to refinance, but it does not impact the payment that they're making, correct? It would, whatever we're locked in at, let's say it's the 1369, and if we refinance at a lower interest rate, say 3%, and it knocks off a few years, they're just paying $13.69 a year, but for fewer years, correct?
In terms of the principal, yes, it will alter the amount of interest being paid. So, but yes, their minimum principal payment would continue the same. The interest part of that payment would slightly change, and then we've seen them end as soon as 18, 19 years. So, in theory, they have paid less of assessment than was originally anticipated. So, if we anticipated that they would pay $30,000 because of because of shaving off those years, that certainly decreased that total balance that they were originally planning for. The principal would stay the same, but the interest.
Right, so so the impact comes just within the length of how long they're paying versus what they're paying each year. Okay.
Commissioner Olson.
So Commissioner Anderson brought up a good point about, a possibility of not assessing for the roadway, but just for the infrastructure. Could you at a future meeting break that down for us to see what that costs, for, estimates?
Yep.
Obviously, at this point, how much is just for the road? How much is for the water and the sewer and whatever, and the stormwater and that, and then just see what that is, and that'll give us another thing to kick around too.
Yeah, and the feasibility study that they would have done where they're taking a microscopic look at the project, they would have literally figured this many lineal feet of water main and assigned a unit price to it, and it's segmented in their cost estimate so that it'd be pretty easy. Obviously, I don't have it today, but it would be pretty easy to ripple out how much of that was, street, water, sewer, and typically you include the storm sewer with the street because it's a drainage component of the roadway section. You see a lot of funding agencies that don't fund utilities like the DOTs. They'll help reimburse for the streets and storm sewer because the storm sewer is a component of the street, whereas the water main and the sanitary is not. So, but we can get as dissective as you'd like to see with that.
Like you said, Moorhead only does X number of dollars per lineal feet or whatever it is. So I would assume the state helps kick in for the rest of it, because they do things a little differently over there than we do on this side of the river.
They do have a different governmental structure over there where they have their public utility, Moorhead Public Utility Services. They do a lot of their own work. Typically where their goal is to rehab a lot of the infrastructure. Their utility company does a lot of those utilities for it, and so it's truly just the streets, and I'm not sure if they assess the storm sewer or not as well, but I know this is, from my discussions with them, the sanitary and the water are not included in that. And one of the thought processes that they had explained to me is that the sanitary sewer is in place, you can reline it, and they treat that as a maintenance project. And we'll talk about that a little further in this presentation as well. And then for the water main, it's just a replacement, but again, they have forces that actually do that work as well.
I agree with Commissioner Anderson and Olson about the breakdown with regard to, the streets and like. I think that's a real possibility of, when we try and develop a policy as we move forward, that might be the best way to approach it, that if you're going to have, interest payments over 25 years, it's one thing to have maybe the sewer and water, but not the street. So, good discussion. Thank you. Please continue.
So that wraps up what I was going to have in front of you as far as the Westwood reconstruction. So coming forth with an engineer's report, and again, the engineer's report that I would bring forward doesn't mean that we have to approve that engineer's report. So I think what I would do in bringing this project forward would dissect it into those different categories and have in the engineer's report, if this is what I'm hearing, is what if we were component-wise, the street component is this much cost and assessment. The water main is this much cost and assessment. And then basically we can take a look at the project buffet and pick what we want off of there and then take a look at that as well. Going back to Commissioner Anderson's comment is I'd like to see what the ripple effect of this decision is over the next 5 to 10 years. We'll have a lot of that information in the workshops and the 2024 CIP that's going to lay that out. And unfortunately, it's just that work is going to be done over the winter, and we're going to bring that forward this spring. And this project was slated to be constructed in 2024, which prompted the meeting today. So if I'm getting feedback right, just compartmentalize the engineer's report, and at that meeting, when we go through it, we can pick what we would like to do from that.
I think it's also critical that in discussions with Mr. Scott and finance, that we truly understand how much of the sales tax dollars are not allocated to other projects and the like, and what is available for the CIP. That has to be thoroughly assessed as well as prairie dog funding and/or any other revenue sources that we can apply to this. State aid and all of those types of things. So, I want you to be cautious. I guess, Mr. Hanson, is that sometimes and this is very well done. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying, but the sticker shock, will put us into making decisions today that might have adverse effects for tomorrow. And that's a concern I have, is that we don't want to do a knee-jerk. Obviously we've got a plan for the future. Mm-hmm. So this is all great analytics that you've done. The idea of you breaking it down to 50 to 25 to 20% assessed is extremely valuable, I think, for us as we look at what the policy might be going forward. So.
And it's possible, again, this is just discussion, it's possible that this is a decision for this neighborhood that the commission says, I can't make this decision until I see that 5-year outlook and what it does for us. I mean, it's not, the neighborhood has gotten by until today. Can it make it one more year? Probably. Public Works just have to take a look, make sure that water main's not breaking and sewer is still flowing. And it could be potentially that we do need to get all of the data, all of the information to make that quality decision. Because as Commissioner Simmons pointed out before, not that we're approving a policy with each and individual engineer's report that I bring forward, but what you do to one, others expect. And so we want to make sure that we're comprehensively thinking, even though it's an individual project. So more to come on this, and I'll bring this back forward in the near future with that engineer's report, and then we can make a discussion at that point with a go, no go, given the new information I'll be able to provide. So moving on from the Westwood neighborhood, as you recall, we had a sanitary sewer project where we installed some manholes because we had intended to reline a lot of existing clay tile pipe, sanitary sewer pipe in the core area. That was intended to be done this year. When we were looking at the scoping for that project, we realized there was a lot of areas we couldn't access with cameras. So that's what prompted us to do the sanitary sewer accessibility project that we're just in the process of finalizing now, where we've added some manholes out in the streets. People have seen the construction of that, and now that we have access to most of those pipes, we can move forward with the 2024 sanitary sewer relining project. What this does is it basically, and this is more of the clay tile pipe that we have in rear yards and alleyways, some of the places that are harder to get at. A lot of the, you don't have a full right-of-way worth of width to work in those alleyways. And it's always cheaper to reline a pipe than to reconstruct it if you're not changing a roadway on top of it that needs reconstruction. So this is a trenchless way of lining the pipe. and basically turning the inside of the pipe back into a PVC pipe. Right now, we do have a feasibility study that's being done on this, where they're taking a look through the sewer pipe, the televising that we do have, coming up with a scope and a cost that I'd be able to bring forward to the commission at that point in time. But wanted to show you the core area, the blue areas that you see on here are some of the targeted pipes that have been identified as needing to be relined, some of the more critical areas based off of the age and condition of those pipes. And what it looks like when you reline a pipe is on the left-hand side, you can see the existing clay tile pipe. Generally, they came in 3 and 4 foot sections, so you have a lot of joints on the pipe. There's a lot of times where people have, over the years, have connected to it, and they basically took a hammer to the side of it and, put a pipe into it and cast some, poured some concrete around it for it. That's just kind of how people have attached to it. There was Ys installed on the original pipe where they thought that there was going to be services, but it's very common to see additional taps that have been put in. Well, all of those things, the movement of the soils and just the age of the pipe and the pressures that it experiences over about 50 years or so, you get a lot of cracks. And the other thing is the infiltration and inflow that you get into these type of pipes. Obviously underground, you've got your groundwater, and anything that has the clay tile pipe, once it gets that crack in it and you look at the televising, sometimes you'll see just a constant stream of water going into the pipe. All of that water now isn't just going out to our lagoons to eventually be treated for 180 days and released into the river. It's paid to ship to Fargo. So every gallon of water that actually gets infiltrated into our sanitary sewer system is now a legitimate cost to the city to pump, because we pay by volume to pump it to Fargo. So we're looking at relining some of these sanitary sewer clay tile pipes. Again, going back to the 2022 CIP, we had an estimated cost of this project of $1 million is what was planned on the 2022 CIP. One of the things that we're going to do when we get the study back is to find out, they might say all the blue pipe that I just showed you is $1.5 million to reline it. It might be $800,000. They got to come up with a cost. And at that point in time, if it's a little bit over the $1 million or something, we wouldn't probably split it into 2 projects. If it comes back and they say there's $2 million worth of it, we'd probably break it out into a couple different projects, but potentially. But right now, for a rehabilitation project, under the guidelines of the 2022 CIP, we have that being assessed at 100%. And the question that I had, and the reason I brought this up, is the project is definitely needed, but is this something that the commission would feel would be maintenance of existing infrastructure more than a rehabilitation or reconstruction of it? Meaning, if it's maintenance like a seal coat, we typically, on a street, we wouldn't assess that. It's just things that we have to maintain to keep things operating. Relining this pipe, you could very easily say that this is a rehabilitation project of the existing pipe. But if that's the case and we're assessing it 100%, we're creating a district for all these core area people, we're sending out the assessment letters, and now we're having a meeting where we're telling them that we're going to assess them to reline the inside of a pipe that's 17 feet deep outside of their house. Again, this isn't something that, for example, Moorhead would, I don't believe, they consider this a maintenance project and they don't assess it. I know when I was in Dilworth, they treated it as maintenance as well. But again, with it loosely, we don't have a document that says relining a pipe is a rehabilitation project. So I wanted to just get your feedback on, do we feel that this is something that should be assessed, or is this something that is just maintenance work that we would just pay out of the capital improvement sales tax budget as we move forward with these type of projects?
Pardon me, just real quick, just point of clarification, I have the 22 CIP up and I see a sewer relining project in here at being assessed at 60/40. I just want to clarify, is that Is there a different relining project on that?
No, that's the relining project, but when I was taking a look at the 60/40, that would be, the only thing that fits into the 2022 CIP percentages for 60/40 would be a local reconstruction. I don't picture relining a pipe as a reconstruct. And so that's where I was, where the spreadsheet that was used to help put together the 2022 CIP did have it at a 60/40 assessment rate. Whereas I looked at that and new eyes on it. I came to the city in June of last year. That's where I thought to myself, this is probably either a rehab or a maintenance project. It would be my opinion, not a reconstruct project, so.
Gotcha.
Yes, it is.
Gotcha.
It
I
is.
just wanted to clarify that just in case. The CIP list itself had it at a 60/40, but the funding strategy you're saying is more of rehabilitation, so
Correct,
it
yep.
would be assessed at 100%.
Yep.
Commissioner Anderson.
Are you ready for a discussion?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, so I don't know, I view this one, I question assessing this one. I feel like we're paying a sewer utility fee. I feel like this is a maintenance type project. The city's gonna see the benefit of this by seeing a reduction, hopefully, in the amount that's getting sent over to Fargo.
Yep.
As a resident, I would be upset if I'm being assessed for something like this when I'm paying a utility fee for sewer. So that's where I'm at with it. And, you know, I know we have the funds, or the fund for it, the sewer fund and stuff for utilities, but, you know, if we need to offset with CIP, sales tax, whatever, then so be it. But my head's at where I consider this more maintenance. I mean, it's a fine line, but I see it more as maintenance from a resident perspective.
Absolutely.
So do you have a cost about how much a lineal foot relining is? Have any idea?
Not off the top of my head standing here, I can get that for you.
Do you have something?
I view it more as a maintenance than a rehab. I don't know what the definition of a rehab versus maintenance, you know, what would Webster's dictionary say maintenance is versus rehab, you know?
And how does that apply
Rehab,
to
you're fixing
infrastructure?
something that's broke, you know, but maintenance is to prevent it. So it kind of follows in, you know, to reline this, because there are broken sections, because there is the I coming in there, so I can see where you could consider it a rehab. But at the same time, I can consider it maintenance, because we're trying to prevent something from happening even more. So I kind of lean towards the maintenance part too.
Commissioner Simmons.
I guess I just want to bring up the fact that I don't care if it's a rehab or a maintenance or what have it, but I don't walk into a department store and buy a pair of shoes if I don't know I have the money in the account. And so for us to make any of these decisions, you know, Mr. Scott, without kind of, you know, all I hear is sales tax, sales tax. We only get so much sales tax. And so my point is, I think somewhere along all these discussions, we have to know how much money, because we're setting a precedent here. This just isn't one project once we do this. So I think we have to know how much money, you know, how much funds that we're dealing with here. And again, I can't imagine anybody going to the grocery store or anywhere and walking in with an empty wallet and expecting to buy. And that's how I look at our budget. I mean, that we have to know what's in it. That's all I'm saying.
It's interesting. I've done some research on this relining because I've had some other elected officials across the state where they're using it. And I believe it's Minot is very high on it.
It's used region-wide here as well. Yeah.
And so, you know, I've been engaged in some conversations about this, and like I said, their results were positive. They, you know, it's a substantial cost savings as well. So,
Yeah.
but this is not this, and because there were some discussions early on about I think some of the cold weather climates as to whether or not this relining is as feasible up here as it is in other parts of the country. But like I said, I know that there's been some projects in North Dakota and they're viewed as very positive.
Yeah, and it's done in the Fargo Moorhead area. One of the last projects I did as the city engineer for Dilworth was we relined almost every piece of VCP pipe in town. And you do it during the summertime months. They can even do it during frost conditions. You wouldn't want to do it when it's 20 below because you have to superheat the pipe and things like that. But it is a very effective way to basically take an old pipe by relining it. You've made the pipe smoother, the hydraulics work better, you take the infiltration out of it. The one thing that it really doesn't do is fix the service laterals, because a lot of times your I&I, you got the same clay tile pipe that comes out from the house to the main. You can line a little bit of that, but it gets very expensive to reline a service in conjunction with it. So we're only talking about mainline relining. And Commissioner Simmons, going back to your example of going in and buying the shoes, I agree 100%. You want to make sure that you have the money in your pocket to pay for it. I would say with the cost of $1 million for this work, the benefit that we would receive from it, I believe that there are funds that would be able to fund this project without having to do the special assessments for that. And going back to your analysis, you're walking into the store with a hole in your current shoes. It's a need, I believe. The other thing is with these old pipes, when you take a look at the total linear feet of pipe that we're talking about relining, the odds are there's probably going to be 1 or 2 breaks or whatnot in those pipes, where now we would have to go out and Public Works would fix it, which means patching the street, which also means that we don't assess those costs. But so we would save future maintenance work of digging up potential issues with doing this. And again, just decreasing our I&I. There is a, it might be small, but there is a return on the dollars spent for this. So
Can you pull up again the slide that showed all the blue, where you'd identified what you would reline? There, that one there. Do you have a cost estimate of that relining?
no, that's what we're under. There, we have a feasibility study
No,
under
if you just had a
underway.
rough estimate or whatever. All right, very good. Thank you.
So with that, me coming back with an engineer's report for this project, I'll bring it back under the assumption that it would be considered a maintenance project with no assessments, and move forward in that direction. And again, we can make official decisions on that when I come forward again. I just wanted to get your take on it. And from what I'm hearing, at least from the two commissioners, is that they'd consider it a maintenance project. So
As do I.
we'll move forward with that assumption. And the last project that I have is a project that was originally presented to the Commission on February 6th of this year. And that's the Southside Mill and Overlay project. At that meeting, we actually approved the districts. We created the improvement districts, passed the resolution of necessity. However, we did not proceed with having the public hearing for that for a number of reasons. One being is there was some turbulence in the finance department, to say the least, that at the time that we decided we were going to just push this project because of the cost of the project. We were going to push that back a year so that way we would have the ability to come back. And then the way that I had presented it, which I'll get to in a moment, is I had presented this as an 80% assessed project back in February. Milling and overlaying it, obviously it revitalizes the pavement, increases the life cycle of the roadway. We typically target projects that were paved 10 to 15 years ago. You have a lot of initial settlement that happens around the pipes, the manholes, things like that, so you get your bumpy streets. These projects, they take the settled asphalt, they take the settled curb, we replace the curb, and we basically make the street smooth again and give it a new surface to extend the life cycle of the roadway. This is an example of what it does and what happens to pavement. Is there is a break point where you get 75% of your life, and then at the point where it shows here, you spend $1 on the pavement preservation before that point. And you can see the life cycle of that pavement just dives after a certain point. If you basically come back in, provide the mill and overlay, give it a new surface, a little more structural integrity back into the surface again. But again, you give the pavement section another layer on the top to wear out again. It can extend the life cycle of that roadway considerably. So this is an ounce of prevention, but it is something, as I mentioned earlier, with the life cycle of a roadway, you typically every 15 years would like to do a mill and overlay on it. And usually after the first mill and overlay, it might not have to take, you might be able to wait longer because generally most 99% of your settlement's gonna come out of the roadway in the first 15 years, obviously. So as long as it's smooth, you can hopefully just hit it with seal coats from that point in time, and then the maintenance of the roadway gets cheaper moving into the future. But so we did identify as presented in February, a number of areas to be mill and overlaid, all of them fitting within those years. The Maple Ridge and the South Pond areas, Shadowwood, West River and Reserve at Osgood, Westport Beach, and some of the beginning of the Wilds, 1st, 2nd, 4th, and 14th editions, as being the neighborhoods that we identified as targeted for this project. Again, various street issues identified, areas of settlement, some broken curb, asphalt failures. With these projects, you'll typically see the first thing to happen is the concrete work. The curb needs to be replaced in areas where it's settled. The other thing is as we mentioned with the ADA transition plan that we had brought forward a number of months ago, whenever you do mill and overlay on the project, you need to reconstruct all of the ped ramps in the area. Part of that ADA transition plan, we stated that any ped ramps that we're going to be replacing on these mill and overlay projects, or just on specific projects that replace the ped ramps, those were going to be costs that were not going to be assessed, is what we determined at that time. So when we're talking of these mill and overlay projects, we are not assessing the costs for any ped ramps in these projects. And then also adjacent to some of these neighborhoods are some regional roadways that are gonna need a little bit of mill and overlay as well. And we were not planning on assessing the regional components of this project too. So the only assessments that we had proposed back in February was that we were just going to assess the mill and overlay portions of the neighborhoods to those abutting property owners, which would include the curb and gutter and the driveways that need to be, driveway aprons that may need to be reconstructed at the time would be also included in those specials. We were breaking it out because the size of the project, we were gonna break it out into 2 separate projects, basically giving potentially more than one contractor the ability to do the projects. It could be that we get one contractor that gets both of them, but we just thought there would be potentially some contractors we would take out of the bidding process if it was that big, because maybe it was just too much for them to bite off. So a consultant is designing half the project. Our engineering staff is designing the other half of the project. And then we are going to combine all of the costs into one district and be able to take advantage of that we were doing some of that work in-house. That wouldn't be charged an engineering percentage because it would be work that we would be doing. So at the time, we created these assessment districts, and I'll just it's the same neighborhoods that I just brought up that are in need of the mill and overlay. These were the assessment districts that were created. And we get to the estimated project costs. Overall, the regional components, for the ADA ramps in the area were estimated to be $1.5 million. The regional city contribution for 9th Street, 36th Avenue, those are the regional roadways that we would be doing some work on. That, as I mentioned, we were not planning on assessing that, $315,000. And it was presented in February at an 80% assessed versus a 20% city cost share for this project. And the reason for that was just as Dustin I identified earlier, is on the 2022 CIP, it was listed in there as an 80% assessed project. You'll note that due to the inflation, obviously, originally on February 6, 2023 commission meeting, we had presented this project at an estimated cost of $7.9 million. It was anticipated to be constructed in 2023. We're moving it to 2024, and basically just because of inflation, the cost of the project is estimated to increase from $7.9 million to $8,390,000. So that's why there's an increased cost for that. I did have the consultant take a look at this, at that dollar amount, and go back and check their numbers and redo their cost estimates, so that way for this presentation I would have more up-to-date numbers on the project. Going back into the current policy, the guidelines that were approved in the 2022 CIP was that rehabilitation projects were assessed at 100%. Recent mill and overlay projects that have been done were assessed at 100%. So the 80%, I believe I covered this as well in February, but just to go back over it again, is the 80% is what I did just to basically bring down the amount to be assessed to the residents to lessen it a little bit. But here today, we're going to be bringing back a revised engineer's report with the new dollar amounts in it. And I wanted to just readdress this question is, do we stick with the 80-20 that I had presented back in February? Or would we like to see it go back to the 100% as we've done in the past and as shown on the 2022 CIP? Or is there a different amount that we would like to see? Which kind of again leads to Commissioner Anderson's, what does this decision do to us over the next 5 years? But again, discussing with Fargo and Moorhead, what do they do on their mill and overlay projects? Mill and overlay projects are outside of their 80-20 for Fargo. Fargo assesses currently and plans to continue to assess 50% on their mill and overlay projects. I know Dilworth also does that as well. And then Moorhead, they just have a $35 per front foot assessment. So a 70-foot lot would be $2,450 in Moorhead for this project. Getting into the numbers a little bit and providing some examples for you. Again, it was the CIP showed 100% for a rehabilitation project. I had presented it at 80%. And if we went with the 80%, especially assessed, the total assessed costs, now there's, again, the project, that's not a total project cost, that's just the assessed amount that we're talking about for the $5,260,000 at an 80% assessed rate. That becomes an equivalent estimated assessment of approximately $4,000. That would be assessed over, say, we stick with the 25 years that we typically assess. That would be a $312 per year payment. And then the city cost for that project would be $3.13 million. A couple of alternative scenarios, if we go back to and do the 100% specially assessed, that basically raises the estimated equivalent unit cost up to nearly $5,000. It increases it obviously about 25%, which would be $1,000. So again, I hope a conservative interest rate over the 25 years that raises that annual payment to $390 per year, lowers the city's cost of the project to $1.815 million. Or if we go to the Fargo comparable and say we were to do for an example of a 50% assessment, the total assessed cost would be $3,287,500, which gets the equivalent unit assessed amount to $2,500, which very closely corresponds with the Moorhead example of a 70-foot lot being $2,450. So even though Moorhead doesn't do a 50-50, take an average lot width is about 70 feet. They're generally in line with each other for that. However, Moorhead does take advantage of, if they're, or not take advantage, but they do utilize the thought process, larger lots should pay more. The way that we have this set up is we take the total dollars, divide it by the number of equivalent lots. And that's how we were planning on doing it. So larger lots aren't getting hit worse than smaller lots. Corner lots are the same as an interior lot, things of that nature. So, but again, at 50% now, the total city cost of the project moves up to $5.1 million. But we're down to $2,500 in assessments. So again, it's a tough decision to make. And again, today isn't a decision, it's just feedback on what you'd like to see. The intent was at the next commission meeting, we would bring back the revised engineer's report. And right now I have the engineer's report basically put together at that 80-20 split that I had presented in February. But just looking for feedback if you'd like to see that change with me bringing this back. And with that, I would just open it up to discussion.
Commissioner Olson?
I'm just curious what a city like a Minot or a Dickinson or a Jamestown does. They don't have a neighboring city to compare to. They have to make their decision on their own and not compare it to their adjoining neighbors. So I mean, I'm just curious, how do they think that they're doing it right, or do they reach out to other cities and see what they're doing and then kind of use that to base their decisions on too? I mean, it's interesting because we're in the shadow of Fargo, and we're about the same size as Moorhead now, but Moorhead's on the other side of the river where things are totally different as far as funding.
Assessment law is completely different in Minnesota.
And we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place because we're always trying to compare ourselves to the Fargo, who's totally, 3 times as large and have a bigger sales tax base and things like population base. And for us to try to be the same, it's tough for us to be the same because we're not the same,
That's correct.
I'm just, so to try to say we have to mirror what Fargo does puts us in a hard place. And I don't think we can. We just have to think about ourselves and not worry about what the other cities are doing, because then we get ourselves into a bind for future projects down the road. Because if we set a precedence today, like on these projects, we're gonna do it this, and then 5 years from now, it's like, oh, we already decided we're gonna go this way, because we've already looked at this a different way in the CIP 2 years ago. And now we're looking like, now we have to reach, we already set a policy. Now we're gonna go back and maybe change the policy. I know, but times, inflation and everything, cost of everything goes, dictates what we do. But I just thought I'd bring that up.
Absolutely, and to your point, West Fargo historically started more of a bedroom community to the Fargo area. And we've been doing some fantastic work in catching up with retail and commercial and industrial and increasing the tax base from those type of residents and users of our system. But we do have a long ways to go if we're gonna catch the percentage of Fargo versus, business versus residential. We're behind the 8 ball on that, and residential does not provide the revenue that business does.
Commissioner Simmons?
Thank you. It is interesting, though, to see how other cities respond and how they pay for their projects, because I do not know that Minot has a capital improvement sales tax, do they?
I do not know that answer.
I don't think they do, but I'm not 100% sure on that. We're one of the unique communities that does have a capital sales improvement tax, from my understanding. So how do they come up?
There's a special election going on today up in Grand Forks regarding to funding. So everybody's struggling with the same issues that we are. The inflation, the precedent that COVID put on the supply chain and all of those types of things. In looking at this mill and overlay project, again, I'm forming the opinion that I think we are have to do less projects because of the rising costs. And that's not exciting for me at all. I'm sad that we have to say that, because there are certain improvements within the city that our taxpayers are going to expect us to fix. But at the same time, we have to take a look at the overall effects that it has with regard to assessing our taxpayers. And so if you were to ask me today if I'm on the mill and overlay projects, am I still in favor of 100% of being assessed? The answer is absolutely not. So, and that's what you're looking for. You're looking for a kind of a feel here.
But at the same time.
5 years ago, I'd have had a different opinion of that.
At the same time, if, like Dan had explained, if we don't, to prolong the life of this, so we don't have to do a total reconstruction, we still have to do these types of projects, but maybe we gotta look at a different schedule, how it fits with everything else we have to fix in this city.
Deferred maintenance can be extremely dangerous and costly.
Right.
I understand that.
I think at the same time, once again, with these projects now, the citizens have a choice here. They have a vote on these. So when we say 100%, I don't think you're going to get any neighborhood to go with that, because they're going to vote it down, in my opinion. I think they would. So somewhere in the middle is where we have to find some common ground, where not only do we get the project done, but they approve it, because they're going to be paying for it. And I've, over the years, I could tell you many times, they've been turned down. And so a lot of it does go on their shoulders as well. And I don't, 100%, Mayor, you're right, it's not going to happen. But maybe, I guess, again, I go back to, I think we need to know how much funding we have to play with. And you know, and I don't know how we're going to, quite honestly, figure that, budget all that into the whole. Because once we do one, here's the deal. That's the precedent for the future, or for the near future. So I know Mr. Scott wants to jump in there.
Sure, thank you. This has been a great opportunity and a great discussion to not only take a look at what policies we have, and you know, there was a lot of work that went into those, but one thing I do want to point out too is the policy that we set forward in the last CIP was really, it wasn't a hard, fast policy as much as it was a starting base as guideline, you know, and that's where we have to, as a city, be flexible to the changing times. Creating a rigid policy does get difficult to deal with things like inflation or pandemics, or, you know, so on and so forth. But in all fairness to the commission, we will be certainly working on understanding what is in our range of ability here. You know, we do have a unique opportunity that we have a capital improvement sales tax. I don't know if there are any other communities. You know, Fargo has designated their sales tax for flood control, and some for streets and some for water. So there's some similarities there. But, you know, in terms of just general dollars discussion, we bring in, you know, a little over $10 million a year in capital improvement sales tax. You know, in total, we are budgeting for about $19 million revenue in sales tax for '24, but of that, about $11 million for capital improvements.
Because the rest of the dollars are allocated.
We have economic development, and now we also have a public safety. And so we are really taking a holistic approach, working with not only engineering, but public works and other departments, police, fire, to understand what are the overall needs, and not just for the next year, but for the next 5 years. And, you know, like Dan mentioned earlier, with some of the turnover we've had this year, we've put some of that effort on hold. We understand what dollars are in our accounts, but we just really haven't put forth the effort to strategically plan on how to utilize those dollars now moving forward and develop a 5-year strategic plan. We've started some of that effort. And again, just in terms of dollar amounts, if we want to take a quick look at a snapshot, we'll bring in $10 million of revenue for the use of capital improvements in a particular year. It doesn't take long before one project took that balance. Westwood alone takes 70% of that. So that starts to paint a picture. Add on a relining, add on an overlay, done. So we understand that using capital improvement sales tax alone, we're going to get 3 projects done a year. That's not going to keep up with the demand. We have to be flexible to other funding options and resources. Unfortunately, or fortunately, the way you look at it, special assessments is one of our very limited tools. But again, as Dan mentioned, we are planning to have additional workshops with commissioners, and that has to be at the forefront of the future meetings here, is to understand what our funding abilities are so that we can start to make additional decisions on how to change our funding, and I'll call them guidelines for now, because a rigid policy just, to me, is not flexible enough to change with the times. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Yeah, I had a discussion with Mr. Hanson earlier, and in 2022, it would appear that we spent about $9 million. In 2023, we spent about $15.5 million.
On what kind of projects? Or is that
A variety of projects.
a variety of projects, but were they all assessed? Were they?
Yeah,
some were
some of them were,
Yeah, for example, the Wilds Phase 2 of that $9-point-some million, $6.2 million of that was the Wilds. That'll be 100% assessed. So not, in the end, it's the end user paying for those dollars. But it's all the above. It's the reconstruction of the north side sanitary sewer, the deep sewer that we've been dealing with. It's the rehabilitation of SA 40. We've rehabbed a number of sanitary lift stations. We've been doing good work. So it's basically all of the above, and to, excuse me, to Mr. Scott's point, I'm selfish standing up here because I'm just talking about my infrastructure projects, my improvement projects. This doesn't go into building needs. It doesn't go into, does Public Works need some of it? I'd like to tell them all no and just use it, but apparently they've got their own agendas that we're all basically in the same situation where we're all using the same dollars. As Mr. Scott mentioned, we have about $11 million coming in next year. I have just taken a quick look. I plugged in a couple different assumptions to it, and basically what I've in the projects that I have slated for next year right now, we're probably using all of that up and that's taking out the assessed amounts of it as well. Yeah, I mean the rehab, the sanitary sewer relining project, to me that's an absolute need. For that's maintaining things that potentially could fail. And when you're talking the core area, all of it is maintaining needs that potentially could fail. The Westwood project, I showed you pictures of their sewer. You know, it's a need. And the engineering, I've heard many people say engineering's the easy part. All I do is show you all the problems, and then it's our turn to figure out how are we going to pay for it. And with the limited tools in our toolbox that we have, there's not a lot of grant funding out there for reconstructing an existing residential neighborhood. There just really isn't. There's low interest loans that a person can look at. There's different things, but there's nothing that says, okay, we've got a $6 million project. The state's going to come in and save us $2 million on something. It's not out there for it. There are grant funding for regional roadways, things like that we're pursuing, and we do go after as many grant funds as we know we can. But again, going back to Commissioner President Dardis's comment a little while ago, putting off prevention eventually leads to much higher costs. Even going back to that diagram that I showed, there's a hinge point there that your roadways deteriorate quite rapidly compared to if we were to rehabilitate them.
the Bank of North Dakota does have a revolving infrastructure loan process of low-interest loans. But I know that in the last legislative session, I think that they asked for an additional $150 million because with COVID and with inflation and all of that, the demand was so high because I think they had like 100 million in that. And don't quote, that's not a firm number. I think it was approximately that. But I know that working with Todd and Calvin from the Bank of North Dakota that they did come back, and I was one of those that testified on their behalf for this money to help the cities and counties and all the different jurisdictions. So everybody's dealing with the same thing. Commissioner Olson.
So, Dustin, you mentioned that we get like $10 million from the Prairie Dog Fund every 2 years, roughly. Oh, that's what we've received this last,
If the buckets fill, we'll get 12 million.
okay.
Right.
But you said some of that's already been promised to other projects or projects that have been completed. Now we're going to take money from, because if they're already completed, aren't they paid for? That's the part I don't understand. If you said that there are already 4 projects that we've already completed, but we don't have the money yet, or did we just get it?
So,
$12 million is so it's 6 million a year.
Right.
12 million for a biennium. And of course, we rely on administration and finance and how to apply those dollars
Right.
to these projects with communications through us as commissioners.
yeah, so just to try to re-summarize that, really since 2018, there are some improvement projects that were made with the understanding that we would either fund them through a revenue bond, using our sewer water utility revenue to go out and bond for those projects, or a combination of sales tax and or prairie dog. So what has been on hold, we really haven't, when I said it earlier, I said we haven't closed them off our books. Yes, we have paid for them, but we really haven't designated, which fund really paid for them. So point being that we did receive $10.5 million this last biennium. That is sitting unencumbered, if you will. We haven't put them towards those projects because, again, the commission had previously indicated that they want to use those funds towards core area projects, for example. But again, there was no hard policy on that. So there's some flexibility there. And the point being, do we use that bucket to buy down some of those projects that we have already constructed? Or are we going to use our reserves in the capital improvement sales tax fund? Or are we going to proceed with what was originally intended and look at a potential revenue bond? We did look at some of that this past spring and understand that our ability to get a revenue bond is very limited in that our utility rates just aren't high enough. Ask average taxpayer, they'll disagree with that statement, but ask the bonding agents, they say that our utility revenue is not high enough to go out for a revenue bond. It's just it. So what I was trying to point out is that we do have, I want to say it's roughly $17 million worth of work that has been completed over the last 5 years or so that we still haven't really truly closed the books on because we haven't identified a funding source. And this came to light, again, with the turnover this year, there was an opportunity to understand and learn some things where we had some I's to dot and T's to cross, and that just happens to be one of them. There's a $17 million book of work that has been done that we really haven't closed the book on. So we can pursue the revenue bond, we can use the prairie dog money, or we could use our sales tax funds to close those. But that's a large book of work, and that just affects our bottom line as to where do we start with now moving forward. And considering we have the engineering projects, we have our building needs, we have all these other improvements, it all has to be factored in when we have subsequent meetings now, our workshops with the commissioners, as to understand truly where do we sit with our financial capability. Hopefully we get additional prairie dog funds, and that'll help lighten the load in terms of using whether it's sales tax or other financial tools. But as of right now, we received $10.5 million to last biennium, and I guess it's a waiting game to see how the state's buckets fill up for this current biennium.
Well, as you heard during the special session, they had another $280 million over and above what their projections were on collections. So, it's positive. There is a potential item coming forward with regard to eliminating property taxes. And if that takes place, the prairie dog bill legislation goes away.
Going back to the mill and overlay project specifically, it's if we've determined that this rehabilitation project is a need. I've heard Commissioner President Darda say 100% is not something that anybody wants to see for that. I've presented it at 80%. Presenting it, moving forward with the project, it would trigger us passing the resolution of necessity, sending out the letters, having the public hearing for the resolution of necessity. However, in the next spring to June, when we do have a chance to paint the picture of what these decisions do over the next 5 years, for example, we can come back and we're not setting the final assessment with this. And I know Commissioner Georgia said, yeah, I get it, we're not setting it, but when does it change? You know, I do understand that sentiment, but during the workshops that we do, when we come out and we do finalize a 2024 CIP, if we identify mill and overlay projects, for example, at a lesser rate, we can proceed with the assessment at that lesser rate to those citizens, but could still proceed under the assumption of the 80-20 as presented in February. I just have to come back with new numbers and move forward as that goes. And then if in the workshops that we do for the final 2024 CIP, we determine that that rate of assessment should be lowered, then when we come up with our final assessments, those final assessments could still come back at a rate lower than what we're doing now, but at least we'd still be able to proceed with the project under a worst case assumption of the 80-20 from the perspective of the end user. If that sounds like something that you'd entertain.
All good discussion, Mr. Hanson, no question about it. You know, when the tax statements went out, I don't know what month, October, September, you know, a lot of us heard from our constituents about our property taxes. Their assessment on their property went up, so we have more dollars to work with, you know. And so that whole discussion during the budgetary process was, you know, you've got more dollars, you don't need any mills, you know, and those types of discussion. And through staff and the commission's work, we listened to that. But the fact remains, because of what the public, you know, pays for their property taxes, anytime that you're going to come forward with another special assessment for improving their streets or water or sewer or whatever, the public's perception is we have plenty of money that we're dealing with, that we collect on property taxes. So to Commissioner Simmons' point, you know, do we have the political will, thank you, the political will to deal with that? And that's the question of the hour right there. So again, the more data that you can provide us, the various scenarios on this funding is extremely valuable. And now we have to put it into application with the revenue sources that we have and how we can apply that and take a look at it. And then probably make some very strategic decisions on how we move forward, even if it's a 5-year plan that we try it at X or Y or Z or whatever the case might be, without totally locking ourselves into you know, a rabbit hole, if you will. Commissioner?
A good point there, Mayor, but I'm just curious about the property taxes. We really don't build into the property tax or mills such projects, though, do we?
Correct, but the public
If we would,
perception.
we'd have to raise everybody's taxes at the start. I mean, that'd be another way to do it. If they don't want to pay specials, then we're just going to raise the tax rates to basically build up enough revenue to fund all these. Because that's the only way. We don't have any revenue sources other than through taxes. I hate to say it, but, you know.
I could tell you don't have to run for 2 more years.
No, but I'm just saying.
I get it, yeah.
I mean, when we set a budget, we're not budgeting a sanitary relining. We're not budgeting a whole reconstruction of all the infrastructure for a neighborhood into the budget. If we were, then we would apply that, but then everybody in the entire city is paying for one neighborhood's rehab.
Correct.
I mean, maybe that's how we need to do it. Or we do the special assessments. It's one or the other, really.
Either way, they pay. I mean,
Right,
you know,
we
I
pay.
mean, but it's
So
just
we
a
can't
matter
put
of
up a
how.
lemonade stand anywhere and collect extra revenue, really.
Good try.
We could try, yeah, but I don't think they would buy lemonade from us.
Let's put Commissioner Simmons in charge of that.
Right.
I'm still trying to figure out how to pay for my shoes, okay?
All right. Anything additional for us, Mr. Hanson?
No, I thank you for your,
Commissioners, any additional questions or comments of Mr. Scott or Mr. Hanson? We look forward as you start bringing this out and applying those dollars, those revenue sources that we have to these projects. Thank you for your time today.
thank you so much, appreciate it.
Commissioners, do you have anything additional that you'd like to bring forward today? No? Commissioner Simmons,
Move to adjourn.
Commissioner Olson,
Second.
we adjourned.